Let's start by talking about a very serious subject, and that is the decision by the United States to strike the airfield in Syria last week. And Amy, we're still dealing with the military repercussions from this, but what about the political? How is the public reacting? And then I want to ask you both about Congress.
Yeah, the Congress seems to be giving somewhat a mixed message on how they feel about what happened in Syria over the weekend. There have been about 3 polls that have come out since the strikes happened. A majority of Americans say they approve of this decision, anywhere from 51 to 57%. But then when you ask them the next question, which is, should we do more things like this? Majority of Americans say we don't want to see any more airstrikes. And then when you ask the question, and I think this is also really important, about what its impact has been on the president. Did Americans rally around the president? Did this bump up his approval rating? It really hasn't done much at all. His approval rating still stands somewhere around 40%. So you have a public that is basically, they're a small majority agreeing with the strikes, but they don't want to see much more. And it hasn't really benefited the president, nor has it made people less likely to support him. He's still basically at the same place he's always been, which again comes back to something we talk about almost every day, every week, is our deep polarization in this country.
And so much of this, Tam, I think, is a matter of people comparing how this president is handling Syria and the Middle East, that part of the world, versus the way President Obama handled it.
That's right. And in terms of Congress, when President Obama went to Congress in 2013 and asked for authorization to take similar action back in 2013, Congress was kind of like, wait, this is a hot potato. We don't necessarily want this hot potato. They found an out that sort of let them off the hook with this deal with Russia to dispose of the chemical weapons, which clearly in retrospect, they're not all gone somehow. And so Congress has frequently wanted to have some ability to weigh in, but then when it comes time to actually weigh in, to authorize the use of military force in a formal way, they've had a lot of trouble agreeing on something.
And Amy, as Tam just said, I mean, this is exactly what President Obama. Right. I mean, we're talking 3 years later, but it's what he was concerned about too, and led to the decision not to.
It feels very familiar, and a lot of that too is the fact that Americans feel very similar to the situation in Syria today as they did back in 2013. This is the ABC poll. 54% said they oppose using additional airstrikes. When you look back at where we were in the fall of 2013, when then President Obama was talking about airstrikes, about 60% opposed doing that. So the public isn't any more looking forward any more today than they were back then to getting more deeply involved in that part of the world.
So Tam, speaking of Congress, members went home this weekend for 2-week Easter recess. Are they likely to hear much from the public about Syria? Are people still talking about health care? What are we expecting in that regard?
I think that health care is something that they're far more likely to hear about. I mean, town halls, if they're happening, and fewer of them are happening. There are more tele-town halls and Facebook town halls and any sort of town hall that won't allow the same sort of video images that dominated during the rise of the Tea Party. Absolutely, they are going to hear about health care. And it's an interesting time for the health care legislation. Republicans in Congress realizing they're about to go home and not wanting to say, wow, we have completely failed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, did some amendments at the very end, right before they left for recess, so that Republican members of Congress could go to Republican districts and say, well, we're still working on it. Health care is not dead. Meanwhile, Democrats are trying to put a lot of pressure and on the left side, progressives are really pushing members of Congress and trying to make sure that this effort doesn't come back to life.